Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. Tonight, we will not only be discussing timely issues like military nonpartisanship and national security, but also timeless questions of leadership and public service. My name is Ryan Tierney. I'm a first year studying history and literature living in Wigglesworth Hall, and I'm also a midshipman in Harvard's Old Ironsides Naval ROTC Battalion. Several months ago, I followed in the footsteps of my father, uncles, grandfathers, and great-uncles by swearing our country's oath of office, pledging to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This covenant, and variations of it, sworn by military and civilian public service servants alike, has motivated thousands of Americans and hundreds of IOP alumni to dedicate themselves to the common good. This rich tradition is daunting. I think about it all the time. But today we are joined by two mentors, a man and a woman who swore that sacred oath, to whom we can look for inspiration. Our guest, Admiral Bill McRaven, is a retired four-star admiral and the former chancellor of the University of Texas system. As a U.S. Navy SEAL, he held command at every level, eventually taking charge of Joint Special Operations Command. He is also the author of Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World, a New York Times bestseller and my mom's go-to graduation gift. Our moderator, Dr. Dana Bourne, is a retired Air Force Brigadier General. Over her impressive 30-year military career, she worked in more roles than I can count, including an exchange officer with the Royal Australian Air Force, the squadron commander of the 11th Mission Support Squadron, and the Dean of Faculty at the United States Air Force Academy. She now serves as the faculty chair of the Senior Executive Fellows Program here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this evening's discussion.
Well, thank you so very much, Ryan, for a wonderful kickoff to this evening's conversation, but also for your excellence, your integrity, and your sense of service and your willingness to join the Navy and make the world a safer and more just place. Ryan, that was fabulous. And welcome, Admiral Bill McRaven. It is just wonderful to meet back with you in this forum, a virtual forum, to talk about something near and dear to both of us, and that's leadership. Now, we're taking an angle tonight, which is fun, which is something that is natural for you, probably for as long as you've been alive, of storytelling and storytelling about leadership. And so tonight we're going to kick off with asking you a question to think back in terms of your lifetime. Think back in terms of all of the wisdom of leadership that you have compiled. And who is it that really inspires and has shaped you to this day? And what couple of qualities would you say resonate most with you?
First, thanks, Dana, to you and Harvard for the invitation to join you all here tonight. And Ryan, thanks for that very generous and very gracious introduction. And also, Ryan, let me thank you for your willingness to serve along with many of your colleagues there at Harvard. When I think back on my time, in the service, my time as the Chancellor of the University of Texas, and all of the great leaders that I have had, an opportunity to spend time around, it's really hard, frankly, to pick any one of them. And as trite as this might sound, one of the best leaders I ever knew was my father. He was a World War II fighter pilot, spent 26 years, started in the Army Air Corps, and then joined the Air Force when the Army Air Corps became the Air Force, and retired as a colonel. And I remember growing up as a young boy, watching my father. And like all of us, we watch our parents, our guardians, our coaches, our teachers, and that's where we get a lot of our inspiration. That's kind of what helps mold us, I think, as young men and women. And my father, from a very early time, kind of reinforced the important values in me. Values of courage and humility. And he didn't push them on me. A lot of it was watching him. He was also a great storyteller. Not always with me around, but amongst, his fighter pilot buddies, as fighter pilots tend to do, as you well know. They tend to tell great stories. But it was also just watching him as an officer, watching him how he dealt with his enlisted airmen, and then watching him as a father as well. And then, of course, I've been blessed in my 37-year career to spend time around some great officers and non-commissioned officers. And collectively, they all kind of had the same traits. They were courageous. They were humble. They understood the value of duty. They listened to the people around them. They were, smart enough to know that they weren't the smartest men and women in the room. And so these qualities, I think, are universal, and people, again, throughout my career have inspired me.
Well, thank you for kicking us right off and honoring your parents as well in your journey of service and leadership. Many of our listeners joined us tonight because of a little tantalizing, what do Osama bin Laden and Somali pirates and Captain Phillips and bin Laden all have in common? And of course, the answer is Admiral Bill McRaven. And so some people want to know if you might share a story about why President Obama gave you a tape measure.
Yeah. This was on the bin Laden raid, and we'd launched that night, the night of May 1st, and obviously, this was a very serious mission with very serious implications. The guys had traveled 162 miles from Afghanistan into Pakistan, got on the target there in Abbottabad. They were on target about 48 minutes, and obviously managed to get bin Laden, got his remains, put them in a helicopter, and began to fly back to the Afghan border. On the way back, probably about 5 minutes or so before they were getting ready to land, the president was on the video teleconference, much like we are here, with me. I was in Afghanistan commanding the mission. And he said, well, Bill, do you know whether or not, for certain whether it's bin Laden? And I said, no, sir, I need to go, personally identify the body. And, before I'm going to tell you that it's bin Laden, I need to kind of see it with my own eyes. And the airfield was just a few minutes from our little command center. So I got in the vehicle and went over to the airfield. About that time, the SEALs had landed. They brought the remains back. The remains were placed on the hangar floor there, and without getting too graphic, I knelt down, I unzipped the body bag, pulled the remains out of the body bag, and obviously it didn't look too good. He'd taken a couple of rounds, and the beard was a little bit shorter, but I was pretty certain it was bin Laden. Having said that, you're not about to tell the president of the United States that you're certain unless you can be as certain as possible. So I pulled the remains out of the body bag and kind of stretched the remains out a little bit because I knew that bin Laden was about 6'4". Well, I'm 6'2", and I thought, well, this is easy. I'll just kind of lie down next to the remains and see if the remains are a little bit larger. But at the time, I was a 3-star admiral, and I thought, that's probably not the right signal to send. It might be inappropriate for me to be lying down next to the remains, but nonetheless, I saw some young sailor, some SEAL standing nearby. I said, son, how tall are you? He goes, well, sir, I'm 6'2". I said, good, come over here, lie down. And he says, what? I said, I need you to lie down. And he immediately understood what I was doing. So he lay down, and the remains were, in fact, a couple inches taller. I didn't really think much of it. And I went back to the command center and got on the video with the president. And he said, well, Bill, what do you think? And I said, well, sir, to be 100% certain we need DNA, but it looks like him. I said, no, by the way, I had a young SEAL lie down next to him, and the remains were about 2 inches longer. And again, it had been a serious night, but there's this pause on the other end of the video. And he says, Bill, let me get this straight. He said, we had $65 million for a helicopter, the one that we lost on the raid, but you didn't have $10 for a tape measure? And I remember it was just kind of the right thing to say at the right moment to kind of bring down the stress and anxiety. We all got a pretty good chuckle out of it. And then we went about kind of doing our business. Well, about a day or so later, I got back to Washington. I was over at the Capitol and having to brief the Armed Services Committee and the Intel committees. and my aide gets called and says, hey, the president would like you to come over to the Oval Office. So I come over to the Oval Office, and the president thanks me and my men, and he says, oh, by the way, I got something for you. And he goes in behind the president's desk, and he pulls out this plaque. And on the plaque, it says, from the President of the United States to Vice Admiral Bill McRaven, if we have $65 million for a tape measure, or $65 million for a helicopter, we ought to have $10 for a tape measure. And on the plaque is a tape measure, which is actually on the shelf behind me here. And again, I have great pride in that tape measure. But now I'm going to tell you just a little bit more to that story, because I think this part is equally important. So the actual original tape measure, I came back and I thought, this really belongs to the history of the men and women at the Special Operations Command I was at. So I left the tape measure there for their little museum. Well, about a week later, guy shows up at my house in Fort Bragg, and he says, hey, the president heard you gave the tape measure to the command. And I said, well, yeah, but and he goes, the president wanted that tape measure for you and your family. So he reached into a bag and pulled out another tape measure, exactly the same. If you looked at them side by side, it'd be hard to tell the difference. But the reason I tell that story is I think it is indicative of the generosity and the graciousness of the president to think, I wanted this for Bill McRaven and his family and his kids to pass down. So the one I have here, again, which is almost identical, is actually the second tape measure. That's a long story, but
that's all right. And it's nice to have it here in the forum. You heard it here first. So thank you very much for sharing that. And we're grateful you have one for you and your family. Speaking of your family, you've written a book, which we talked about, Ryan introduced, which is a bestseller still in terms of Make Your Bed. But you just released also another version for young kids. I think it's something to do with Skipper the Seal. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about the link between the two and the focus of Skipper the Seal?
Yeah, I actually have two books coming out here in the next, actually one starting the next month, called The Hero Code. And it is about, frankly, the heroes that I've met in my lifetime and the kind of the impression they had on me and the qualities I think that helped make them the heroes that they are. And then I've been asked a number of times since the book Make Your Bed came out, could we do a children's version of this? Last summer I sat down and kind of framed it out, and it is essentially the Make Your Bed book with Skipper the Seal. So Skipper the Seal is this very, I think, cute, SEAL that goes through SEAL training. He learns all the lessons that I put in Make Your Bed. But I tell you, the real hero of this book is Howard McWilliam, the illustrator. If you get a good illustrator who can catch the personalities of the little creatures that are going through SEAL training and capture all of the intricacies of the complexness of, the sugar cookie and the staring down the sharks. And Howard's just done a magnificent job. But that comes out in September, and I hope the kids enjoy it.
Well, you've invested so much of your life in developing principled leaders, and now that's going to even your grandchildren, but for all of us, starting earlier. Now, I'd like to keep on the theme of that principled leadership and recognize that you have developed people through the military and your 38 years of service in very big, broad, important, dangerous commands. And you've also taken on a senior civilian leadership as the chancellor of the University of Texas system. And developing layers of principled leadership has to be an incredible challenge. I heard recently, and I think we all did, President Biden's comment about for America to not just be the power of our example, not the example of our power. So really principled leadership at a national level. How do you recommend we do that to create this culture of moral leadership, a culture of integrity, a culture of character in really large organizations and or societies or around the globe?
Yeah, well, it really does, frankly, it starts at the top. And the top nationally, of course, is the president. in this regard. I mean, we have to expect, men and women of character in our leadership positions on the Hill, at the Supreme Court, in the executive branch that kind of demonstrate the qualities that we expect, the courage and the humility and the compassion and this kind of, sense of integrity and honesty. Because if you don't have that, if that's not an example that you see every day, and the civility, we hope that we will become more civil, because if you don't see that every day, if you don't see it on social media, if you don't see it on mass media, if you don't read about it, that people are being civil, that people are reaching out across the aisles, that our leaders are trying to do what's right for America, then frankly, you find the rank and file, the citizens, then they feel that, well, I guess if our leaders don't display those characteristics, if that's not their values, then kind of why should it be our values? Now, fortunately, I think what most Americans have found also is that there are so many other great leaders we can look to. But I would say nationally, you do need to look to, the top, if you will, the top of the pyramid. But when that doesn't work for you, then all you have to do is look to your left and your right, and you're going to find great leaders. You're going to find great teachers that are remarkable leaders. You're going to find healthcare professionals. You're going to find soldiers. I mean, people that demonstrate the qualities that that we need. And people know what these qualities are. I mean, you don't have to tell them. I mean, everybody knows it's important to be honest. Everybody knows it's important to be trustworthy. Everybody knows it's important to be civil. These are, the things that we were all raised with to some degree. And when you are not living up to those standards and to those values. So as a nation, we need to look to, our local, our state, and our federal levels. But frankly, as people, if we don't find the values we're looking for there, all you have to do is look around at the great, public servants and friends and mentors that you have that really represent those values you're looking for.
Thank you. You've always been a deliverer of hope and optimism, and it's got to be difficult, particularly because you have made that transition from military to civilian, lines in the sand in terms of political vocalization of truth. And as a flag officer or retired officers, it can be challenging. And they collaborated on scribing a document. Where do you fall with regard to, where is that line with speaking out as a retired flag rank officer when it comes to speaking truth on certain political affairs?
Yeah, let me talk about a couple things that you raised there, Dana. First, in terms of hope and optimism, I never, ever lose hope in America. I am never not optimistic about America. And frankly, I am probably actually more optimistic now than I've been in a long time. And the reason I am is because I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z you'll ever meet. I mean, this narrative that somehow they are these soft, entitled little snowflakes. Well, then I'm quick to point out you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan, or you've never seen them, going to school in the Rio Grande Valley, trying to make a better life for themselves. I teach a graduate school course at the LBJ school, and I had my last class last night. And once again, I am reinvigorated by the young men and women that are looking to go into public service. So anybody out there that thinks that America is on the decline, or that we don't have a great group of young men and women coming up, boy, you're not looking in the same place as I am. So I have tremendous optimism about the future of America. In terms of the role of retired flags, I've said before, I've obviously spoken out a lot in the last couple of years, and I've been criticized for it. And I have said that's fair criticism. I'm okay with that. I'm okay when people say, hey, there's an unwritten rule that senior flag officers don't speak out against the President of the United States. And that is a good rule. And I've said, look, I got it. And I violated that rule. So I violated that rule because, I've got to wake up and look myself in the mirror and decide whether or not I think I'm doing the right thing. But then you can't be surprised when you have to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune as people criticize you for it. I'm okay with that. because I think it was more important to make my point. And again, I tried only to make it when I felt that there was something that was profoundly wrong. I wasn't trying to be some talking head, lamenting about things that the president did, every other day. I picked and chose my battles, I think, hopefully correctly. But, again, that's just something each individual has to decide on their own. But as I have talked to other senior officers, I have kind of forewarned them, look, if you do this, expect to get a lot of hate mail, a lot of death threats. You're going to lose friends over this. But if you believe it's the right thing to do, then I think it's important to do that.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your directness in how you answer that question, also your optimism. And so we're going to stay on some challenging topics if we can. Sure. One is domestic terrorism. And right now, I mean, some of the trend lines from, the Oklahoma bombing to today, and the trend line's not in the right direction with regard to domestic terrorism. What are your thoughts? How do we turn this around? And particularly, how are you thinking about the fact that many of our insurgents on the 6th of January were military members?
Yeah, I applaud Secretary Austin for kind of doing this, extremist, stand down to take a hard look at each of our commands to see whether or not we think that there are, white nationalists or extremist elements in that. I do think we have to be careful about that, though. I mean, anytime you go out looking for something, we can't all of a sudden decide that because somebody's wearing a MAGA hat that they're an extremist, or because they've got, liberal views or overly conservative views that makes them an extremist. That is not what we want to do. And I think from what I've seen, the military is thoughtful about this, and they're trying to identify, truly extremist threats within the military. Having said that, I know there was a 2020 report that looked at extremism in the military and found that were there extremists in the military? Sure. I mean, we're a subset of the American population. There was a very small subset within the military, and what I'm hoping is that when this new look at extremists in the military comes out and we get a chance to look at it, we will find that yes, I'm certain there will be a segment of the military that remains, far right or far left. But I'm hoping it's very, very small. And then we just have to find a way to root it out. And the way you root it out is you make sure that every single soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine that comes into the military understands when they raise their right hand, it is to the Constitution of the United States. It is not to a president. It is not to a military leader. It is not to a public servant. It is to the Constitution of the United States and the values embodied in that Constitution. And as long as they don't lose sight of the fact that it is about the Constitution, then I think we will be on the road to recovering from, whatever those problems are. But you can never take your eye off the ball. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is just, constantly tending the garden to make sure that those extremist groups are rooted out if we find them to be existing in the military or elsewhere.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And let's stay on some other challenges that we have here. I mean, President Biden clearly has his first 100 days challenging with issues that deal with health, deal with social injustice, the climate. We have the economy. I mean, the list kind of goes on. What do you recommend as a priority for President Biden and the First Lady? They're still in their 100 days. What would you put at the top?
Yeah, I think they have laid out a great agenda for the first 100 days. The thing that, I applaud them on the most is not looking back and not, trying to relitigate anything that has come before them. I think it would have been easy to get into the, tit for tat from the previous administration. And as I recall, President Biden saying at one point in time is, I'm just not going to talk about that anymore. We're here to move forward with the American agenda. First on his agenda, I think, was solving the COVID problem. And he seems to be moving out on that at light speed. Obviously, he's done a lot of executive orders to rewrite some of the things that the previous administration put into place. I do think, and of course, the First Lady, I think one of her agendas early on has been, support to the military families. And of course, we couldn't be happier than to see her engagement, because she has, frankly, she's been doing this for a long time. My wife spent some time with her when she was Second Lady down at Fort Bragg. And Jill Biden has always been a great supporter of the military. So, I'm confident that the president's agenda is on track. I think he's hitting on all the right issues, and he's making a lot of progress in the first 100 days, and I commend him for it.
Well, thank you. And I know at the top of the list is clearly the coronavirus and vaccines. This is actually a national security issue as well, when we think about how a pathogen has really taken not just our country, but the world basically to our knees. How do you think about that in terms of national security challenges going forward, with either natural pathogens or engineered as a national security increased risk?
Yeah, well, as you well know, Dana, in the military, we think about this a lot. In my time in the Navy, on ships, we on ships were always prepared with gas masks, with hazmat material when required, to be able to deal with these issues. The Army, the soldiers I've spent time with, they understand how to work in a biological, chemical environment. So I don't, again, that's not to say that every time you have a new pathogen out there, we don't need to be thoughtful about how we deal with it. But I know we will know how to deal with it. I think what COVID has shown us is that, we need to ensure that our protocols are in place, that we can still fight, that we can, as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, we know how to fight with all the MOP gear on, if necessary, or we know how to contain it off the ships, off the submarines, outside the battalions. So I'm not overly concerned that that COVID or the next generation of pathogen will somehow shut the military down. I do think as with all things, we need to continue to learn. We need to continue to improve our tactics, techniques, and procedures in dealing with these pathogens. We need to continue to improve the technology for the sailors. I remember when I was out during Desert Storm, we practiced every single day because there was concerns about Saddam launching chemical weapons, and you would spend all day long in these scorching hot suits. But you had to learn how to fight the ship with that stuff on. So it's not comfortable, but it's necessary if you're going to continue to do the nation's business. So I think COVID has been a wake-up call for us, but it's not something we don't know how to do. We just need to, again, rehearse it, practice it, make sure, again, that we're prepared for the next time this comes around. And there will be a next time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask just a couple of more questions, and we'll open it up then to the many questions I know that we have waiting for you. This question actually deals with all these crises we've been talking about and the vacuum people have talked about in terms of global leadership. Who's going to step up? Who should step up for some of these major challenges that we've been talking about?
Well, this does get back to, Dana, let me see if you can hear me. I don't know whether
You're good.
Okay, good.
I can hear you.
Yeah, this gets back to the issue of American leadership. And I think one of the things that the President Biden has done very early on, and again, I commend him for it, is, he's re-engaging with our allies. We have to recognize that, the world, as Tom Friedman said, is a very flat place. You cannot exist in the world today without allies. You cannot expect to solve the pandemics without allies. You can't expect to solve the security problems without allies. You can't expect to solve the trade problems without allies. So we've got to figure out a way to work with our allies. We've got to bring American leadership back to the forefront. Because if we're not leading, who's going to lead? Are we going to allow China to lead? Are we going to allow Russia to lead? If we allow them to lead, I guarantee you, the world's going to be a different place. We need American leadership. Now, that doesn't mean we need to get up and beat people about the head and shoulders and say we're in charge again. But it does mean we have to, as the president said, lead by our example. We've got to show the world that we're serious about world health. Rejoin the World Health Organization. It ain't perfect, but it's an important part of the the international efforts to deal with the global health issues. We need to re-engage on the Paris Climate Accords. We need to ensure our allies like NATO understand we're going to be there for you and we respect you and we want to be with you in whatever partnership is required. So it's going to take American leadership. I think the world is longing for us to be back in a leadership role. They may be a little skeptical at first, and they have reason to be. What we don't want to find is we say we're back, and they go, "Oh, hold on a second. You're going to have to show me that you're back." And I think that's a fair challenge to us because clearly we haven't shown that, I don't think, in the last 4 years. And so as we move forward, they also want to make sure that 4 years from now, that all of a sudden it doesn't turn around again. That requires, frankly, legislation rather than executive orders, rather than the executive branch just kind of going off on its own. It requires a full effort on the part of the American people to move forward. But it really is about American leadership and recognizing that we need to find ways to work globally with, again, America in the lead.
Well, thank you for bringing that into a global hope. And you mentioned China, and our bilateral relations with China got a little bit stressed during the pandemic. And now we're sort of regrouping in terms of the way forward. How do you see our relationship evolving with China going forward?
Yeah, well, I don't see China as an adversary. And I think we have to be very careful about painting them into a corner by, implying that that we have an adversarial relationship. We don't want to get into a Cold War with China. They are a competitor. And I think we have to look at them as a competitor, particularly in light of, when we look at AI and machine learning. I mean, right now we are still, I think, well ahead of the Chinese, but they are investing a lot of government money in basic research. And it's really basic research that brings you the internet, that brings you these great breakthroughs in technology. We need to make sure the US government is investing in basic research as well, so we don't allow the Chinese to close that gap. We look at the Belt and Road Initiative that the Chinese have going, and of course, it kind of bypasses the World Trade Organization's kind of standards for ethical, ethical movement of supplies and goods. We need to hold them accountable. Now, the one concern I do have with China that does put them in an adversarial relationship is this increasing rhetoric I hear coming out of both Xi Jinping and other members of the Chinese party about Taiwan and war with Taiwan. Obviously, nobody wants war with Taiwan. We don't want the Chinese to invade Taiwan. We don't want to find ourselves in a position to get in the middle of this. And sometimes I think the only way to do that is to show that we're strong. And while we continue to support the one China policy, which we agreed to back during normalization in like 1979, we have also agreed as part of that normalization to supply defensive weapons to Taiwan. So this is a delicate balance. That could be something that would tip the scales. We do obviously have to look at the Chinese activity in the Spratly Islands and concerns about freedom of navigation, but I think we can work all of that out. The way to deal with the Chinese, in my opinion, is for us to invest more in Southeast Asia, is to figure out how we can leverage things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership that is 40% of the world's GDP to be able to compete with China in that part of the world and other parts of the world. So once again, it goes back to these alliances. It goes back to the power of our economy, which is the most powerful economy in the world, and we need to leverage that more so, I think, than trying to bluster our chest out and threaten the Chinese.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And we are ready to jump into questions. I'm going to give a reminder, since we are a virtual forum event, that the rules are the same. So first, please give your name, your affiliation with Harvard, and then a very brief question that is not a speech, but is very short, succinct, and ends in a question mark. So our first question is coming from Ajay. Ajay, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Ajay. I'm a sophomore at Harvard College, calling in from St. John's, Florida, right outside of Jacksonville. Admiral McRaven, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your service. There was a lot of discussion during the questions sort of about like America's role as a global leader and I guess like American global stewardship. But something that's especially salient to me about the war on terror and aspects of, say, Operation Enduring Freedom and other such operations is the immense loss of civilian life, as well as justifications coming from the Central Intelligence Agency and military authorities for programs such as extraordinary rendition, interrogations, and things that generally violate our international commitments under, say, the Geneva Conventions. And I guess I wanted to know more about how human rights factor into your thought process, Admiral McRaven, and whether you feel like in that respect, America has maintained its international commitments and is fit to be a global leader.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I will tell you from my time in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. Are we always successful? Absolutely not. It is the unfortunate nature of war is you find yourself in situations where you're trying to protect the troops in contact and you engage a house that is firing upon them and you inadvertently kill innocent civilians. Did it happen? Of course it did. It is horrible and it is unfortunate. But I would offer that more so, I think, than any other country out there, we go to these extraordinary lengths. I mean, the precision of our weapons today are remarkable compared to Desert Storm, compared to Vietnam and Korea and World War II, and we're going to continue to try to get better. There are aspects of the war that we need to be held accountable for. When you looked at some of the harsh interrogation techniques that maybe exceeded, to your point, that exceeded the law, then people need to be held accountable for that. But I would offer once again that most of the great intelligence and military professionals I know who were having to deal in this very gray area did everything they could to do it right. Again, did they always get it right? No. Does the human dimension come into it sometimes? You bet it does. It's when somebody's shooting at you, when your buddies are getting killed in combat, you'd like to say, oh, by the way, here's the list of rules you have to follow, and make sure that you don't violate a single one of those, except when the soldier is furious because his buddy's been killed, he reacts in a certain way. Doesn't mean you don't have to hold them accountable if they've done bad things. You need to. And I think our record in that regard is pretty good. Not perfect, never going to be, but pretty good.
Thank you, Admiral.
Good. Thanks, Ajay.
Thank you for the great question, Ajay. Our next question is coming from Alice Stewart.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm a member of the Student Advisory Committee and a former fellow, and I, like everyone here, love your book. And I wanted to share something not quite as highbrow as the last questions and probably the rest, but if you can explain to the students, I make my bed every single day, and I think of you when I do it because of the messages in your book. Just touch on the key message of your book and briefly share the story about Saddam Hussein that you talk about at the beginning of your book, because that really jumped out at me and it always sticks in my head.
Yeah, thanks. Well, of course, the book is a kind of direct reflection of my 2014 commencement address at the University of Texas. And the story of making your bed, as I told folks when I started SEAL training, every morning we got up and the instructors would come in, and these were salty old Vietnam veterans. I mean, they're highly decorated guys that had been in combat, and every morning they inspected us and they inspected our bed. And I remember thinking to myself, I mean, I don't get it. I came here to be this battle-hardened Navy SEAL, and they're teaching me to make my bed. A couple months went by, and I finally asked one of these old Vietnam vets. I said, oh, look, why do we do this? I understand our uniforms got to look sharp, but why do we spend so much time making our bed? And he said, well, it's simple. He said, the fact of the matter is, if you start your day with a task completed and you take a little pride in it, then it'll encourage you to do another task and another and another. And he said, and also, it's about the little things. If you can't even make your bed to exacting standards, then how are we ever going to trust you to lead a complex SEAL mission? Learn to do the little things right, and you'll learn to do the big things right. But the bed took on another analogy later on in my career, and for some reason it resonated more when I was in Afghanistan. When I was there, I lived in what was referred to as a B hut made by the Navy Seabees, just a plywood room. I'm a 3-star admiral, and I had the only thing in my B hut was a bed. And every morning I'd get up, I'd go do my PT, and I would come back, I'd make my bed, because I knew when I stepped out of that plywood room, I was stepping into a combat zone. And unfortunately, soldiers were going to die, civilians would inadvertently get killed, bad things were going to be happening. Admirals would be yelling at me, generals would be yelling at me, presidents and prime ministers, everybody was yelling at me. Outside that room was chaotic, and the days were long. But when I came back and I opened that plywood door, my bed was made. And it gave me some small sense of control of my life. So, the bed, I think, has a lot of analogies, but I start every morning by making my bed, and it kind of motivates me to do more things throughout the course of the day.
Thank you for asking that question, Alice. And I'm guessing that in Skipper the SEAL, he makes his bed as well.
He does.
Excellent. Our next question is from Jack Weldon. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, I'm a freshman at the college. My question is, like Ryan mentioned earlier, your book has kind of become like a staple graduation gift. And I found that those messages in the book were like especially pertinent to how we are living in today's world. As like I graduated, of course, during the course of the pandemic. So I'm first year. And I was wondering whether you thought that any of those messages specifically have changed at all or have any increased relevance in this time. And like, what would you say for students dealing with sort of like the hardships of isolation of COVID? Which of those messages are like most relevant now?
Yeah, thanks. I get, I'm always flattered and honored and surprised by the number of emails I get every week from people that have read Make Your Bed, and they always gravitate towards the first chapter of Making Your Bed, and particularly now during COVID. Almost every one of them says, I was having a tough time, and I started making my bed. And it sounds silly. I mean, there's no rocket science here. It's not complicated. But when you get up and you make your bed, you really do. You walk away and you go, okay, I got something done. And it also just makes sure that, you're starting your day off right. The other one I would offer in this COVID environment is the last chapter, which is about not ringing the bell. And in SEAL training, we have a bell, and all you have to do to quit is you ring the bell 3 times and you're out, no questions asked. And there are days, of course, in COVID, and we all have those days, not just in COVID, but in the rest of our lives, where you just go, man, I'm fed up. I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like my job. I don't like my relationships. I don't like school. Pick something. I've had those times in my career a number of times. And I remember every time when I was thinking about giving up, I would come home and I would talk to my wife. And I remember the first time it happened, I'd been fired. It's never good to get fired in the Navy. It's really bad to get fired in the SEAL teams because everybody knows you've been fired. And I remember thinking, well, my career is over. I was a young lieutenant. And I came home and I thought, well, I guess I'll get out of the Navy. My wife looked at me and she said, you've never quit at anything in your life. Don't start now. And she had to tell me that a couple times in the course of my career because things get tough. So I would offer, when you're having a bad day in this COVID world we're in, start off by making your bed and just remember things are going to be tough, but you'll get beyond it. Just don't ring the bell.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Jack. And we next have a question from Hannah Batrell. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here and, of course, for serving our country. We're so lucky to have you in the forum tonight. So my question is just in regards to how has your immense experience being a leader in the military translated to how you serve as a leader in other aspects of your life that are not related to the military?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when I transitioned, when I retired from the military and I took over running the University of Texas system, 230,000 students, 100,000 employees, and I would do a lot of town hall meetings, where the donors or students or somebody, and invariably somebody would ask this question, but it would always be asked in almost kind of a rhetorical sense. They would say, "Well, Chancellor, you know, how is it now that you're, leading all these academics and the students and, because obviously when you were in the military, you just told people what to do and they did it. But now, of course, you've got these faculty and they won't do that." And I would always say, well, let me tell you something. If you think when you're in the military, you just tell people what to do and they do it, you never spent a day in the military because that's just not the way it works. I mean, leadership is leadership. In the military, you've got to inspire, you've got to motivate. Sometimes you have to kind of kick people in the fourth point of contact and get them going. So what you find is leadership is fungible. Now, the one thing I would offer when I transitioned from the military to higher education and healthcare, every leader needs to understand the basics. I had to come in and I had to listen. You can't be a leader unless you understand what's going on. I wanted to know, tell me what a chair does. Tell me what a dean does. Tell me what a provost does. Tell me the role of the president. And on the healthcare side, tell me what a researcher does. What's the difference between a researcher and, a scientist? And tell me how all of the intellectual protocols work. And so you have to learn and you have to listen and be a little bit humble about the fact that you're not the smartest person in the room. I was blessed when I came into the University of Texas to have a remarkable staff, great PhDs and MDs and lawyers who were supporting me. And I mean, I learned the trade of higher education, but I also found that the same skills that I'd learned in the military, which is, look, as a leader, you come in, you want to be a servant leader, you want to set high standards, you want to give people the latitude to do the job, and then you want to hold them accountable when they don't do the job. Because everybody wants to be part of a great organization, and that's the only way you get a great organization is having high standards, giving people the latitude to do the job, and then holding them accountable when they don't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Admiral, we have a question next from Kyle Englander. So Kyle, welcome.
Hello, sorry my video is not turning on, but Admiral McRaven, thank you for your service and for taking the time to be here tonight. Like Ryan, I'm a Navy ROTC midshipman at Harvard's Old Ironside Battalion, and I'm hoping to be a Navy SEAL officer, actually, largely in part to inspirations I drew from your book and others. My question is, with that in mind, I was wondering how you perceive the role of special operations changing as we transition away from the war on terror and towards the threat of China and other great power competitors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we find, and the Special Operations Command is already looking at this in great detail, but the set of skills that comes with a Special Operations warrior are, again, they're unique skills. They're different than the conventional force. As I've always said, look, the Special Operations Forces aren't going to stop the North Koreans from coming south. We're not going to be able to keep the Straits of Malacca open. We're not going to be able to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. We have a unique skill set. It's a pretty broad skill set, but it is unique in the special operations community. I think the skills and the things that we learned over the last 20 years as part of the global war on terrorism, some of those are absolutely fungible. How do you fight? How do you do reconnaissance? How do you bring combined arms into a problem set? But obviously now we're talking about a state-sponsored military. If we had to deal with the Chinese or the Russians, the great powers competition, I think, as we look forward, this is going to be, for us, taking those unique skills that we have that make us special, which is specially selected, specially trained, specially equipped. We are no braver, no more patriotic, no more hardworking than our conventional counterparts, but we have a different sort of mission. And that will be able to be applied on the coastline as we're looking at targets along the coastline. Or how do you put guys deep behind enemy lines? These sorts of things are skill sets that we have had for decades. Now we just have to reinvigorate that skill set again. But frankly, I don't think that will be hard for us to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And we have another question from the college. John Cogbill, please join us.
Hey, sir. My name is John Cogbill. I'm actually an Army cadet in the ROTC battalion here. So first off, I just wanted to thank you for being such a huge inspiration to me, kind of as I was shaping my process of wanting to join the military. You know, everything that you had to say and you as a leader was a huge inspiration and motivation. But I am interested in branching cyber and eventually going into the soft community later on in my time in the Army. And I was just kind of wondering, where do you see the trajectory of cybersecurity and cyber operations going in the coming years, seeing as America's not always on par with some of our near-peer adversaries in that regard?
Yeah, I would offer we are actually far above par for most of our peer competitors. It doesn't look that way sometimes, and I'm okay with that because I know what's happening kind of behind the green curtain. But suffice to say, we have the best cyber capabilities in the world, bar none. How we choose to use those cyber skills, though, is something that I think we are grappling with. What are our cyber rules of engagement? What is the law of armed conflict equivalent in the cyber world? We understand in the kinetic world that if somebody shoots at you, you have the right of self-protection and you have the responsibility of unit protection. But if somebody fires an electron, do you fire back immediately? Do you, do you provide overwhelming force to counter that? I don't think we've got as good enough handle on that yet. But here's what I'd offer on the cyber side. Everything in the future is going to be connected. It was very interesting here. We had this snowmageddon here in Texas, and it shut down all the Wi-Fi, all the cell service, and you began to realize very quickly that I couldn't even call 911 because our landline was connected to a Wi-Fi, which had never occurred to me. So everything is going to be connected one way or the other, which means that everything will have the potential to be penetrated. So as we begin to build our new systems in the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, we're going to have to figure out, how do we protect them from a cyber standpoint? How do we protect the grid? And then how do we do offensive cyber operations to ensure the forces on the ground can maneuver efficiently and effectively? We did a lot of that in Iraq and Afghanistan against a less sophisticated enemy, but the same principles will apply. But cyber is a huge growth area. So you're certainly going into a great field, and you will not have any shortages of challenges.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, you're giving quite a pep talk, and a lot of recruiting and inspiration continues. Our next question is coming in from an alum from Harvard, Monte McMurthy. Welcome, Monte.
Good evening, Monte McMurtry, calling from my bunker in downtown Toronto. Admiral, my kudos and compliments. My comment to you, sir, is this. How does one calibrate the epistemic quality of fear, the epistemic quality of the unknown, the epistemic quality of how do I do that which I do not know, but yet doing it well in terms of calibration, ensuring less harm? I thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Yeah, interestingly enough, I get asked that question quite a bit. You spend a lot of time in combat, were you afraid? And the answer is absolutely. You're scared every time you get on a helicopter flying through the Hindu Kush. You're scared every time a mortar's landing near you. You're scared a lot of times. You ought to be scared. There's some things out there that are pretty frightening. But to your question, you rely a lot on your training. You rely a lot on the men and women that are around you that understand what the threat looks like. But also, this is really where I think your internal compass comes into play. Courage is one of these things that I believe is inside all of us. And sometimes you've got to find something that brings that courage out. For me, it's always the threat against my troops. I mean, if there's a threat against my troops, stand by, I'm wading in. I'm going to be there whether it costs me life or limb, because you value their lives so much. And it causes you to be courageous when maybe, you weren't always going to be courageous. And of course, I saw that with the young troops every single night. They went into harm's way, not because always they believed in the politics, not because they were waving their flags, but because they believed in the men and women around them. That's what allows you to be strong and courageous and take that fear and put it deep inside you, because you have great soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that are around you, and you know they're going to do the same thing for you. And that inspires you, and that allows you to deal with that fear.
Thank you, Monty. Wonderful question. Thanks for joining us. And our last question, we only have time for one more. And so Patrick Tierney, you have our very last question for the night.
Good evening, Admiral McRaven. I'm a alumni of the Harvard Business School. Over the last 4 years, the yin and yang has included a applied civics lesson. You said so yourself that, very few people understand what goes through the mind of a military leader. And in fact, as we all know, very few people know someone who knows someone in the military. This civics lesson hit an apex on the 6th of January. Either through talking about that or another incident, can you help us understand what was going through the mind of military leaders on the 6th of January, like General Mark Milley?
Yeah. Well, I think you've heard from General Mark Milley. Mark has made, and let me say that General Mark Milley, one of the finest officers I ever served with, period. And frankly, I think he was absolutely the right person to have as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs over the last couple of years. Now, and here's why I will reinforce that. If you recall, when he got wrapped up into this very awful photo opportunity with President Trump as he went through Farragut Square, and Mark's caught on film in his camouflage utilities, and of course it was a horrible reflection of the role of the military vis-a-vis what was happening. And what happened was the next day or the day after that, I forget, Mark Milley went forward and apologized for being caught in that predicament, reinforced the fact that the American soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine support the Constitution of the United States. And I think his words were, we don't support a king, we don't support a prince, we don't support any single individual. We support the Constitution of the United States. So back to, I think, one of the very early questions that Dana asked, as we look at what happened on January 6th, and certainly from the aspect of the military, we have to go back to these young men and women that are joining the military and reinforce with them that this is about the Constitution. This is about the people of this country and the values that we hold dear. And these values are embodied in the Constitution. And so I think as we look at it as a civics lesson, the civics lesson is read the Constitution, live the Constitution, understand the importance and the values that we as Americans hold so dear, and that will sustain us, I think, through these these horrible insurgencies or these horrible insurrections that we saw on January 6th, and what may come in the future. Which I hope is nothing. I hope the American people have learned their lesson. But if not, the best way to deal with it is to reflect on the Constitution and reinforce those values with all Americans.
Well, thank you very much. And what wonderful questions that you all brought. I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. Most especially, I'd like to thank you, Admiral Bill McRaven. Life lessons, we learned many of them tonight, and you really are just an amazing warrior and a storyteller. And so on behalf of all our listeners and those that are going to listen later, and on behalf of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Institute of Politics, we're just deeply grateful for you continuing to share these incredible life lessons and to tell stories that really grab people's heads, hearts, and create new action to make the world better. So imagine what we can do together. That's what we say at the Harvard Kennedy School. On that, I'm going to bring Mark Guerin, our director from the Institute of Politics, on, and he's got some announcements of more upcoming events. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana. Thanks for your thoughtful moderation. And Admiral, thank you very much, certainly for your service, for the inspiration I'm sure you felt from our students and for a really fascinating conversation. And of course, to Ryan for his great introduction and really his energy behind this. I just wanted to, in addition to my thanks, invite all our viewers to a fascinating forum we have scheduled for tomorrow at 1 p.m. A year ago, our very last in-person forum was on the subject of COVID-19, where at that point, before the closure of Harvard and other institutions, we convened a really fascinating panel with our own Professor Juliet Kayyem, Helen Branswell, a senior writer for STAT, Dr. Michael Mina from the Chan School of Public Health, moderated by Rick Burke, who is the co-founder and executive editor of STAT, on the question of COVID-19. And at that point, they said some rather surprising and startling things, and they were proved right. So we have reconvened them tomorrow for a conversation 1 year later, the implications of the past year of the pandemic and their views going forward. So we invite all of you to join us at 1 o'clock. It will be a fascinating conversation. They were absolutely prescient in their views a year ago, and I have no doubt they'll bring that to tomorrow. So with my thanks, Dana, to you as a great colleague for your moderation, and of course, to Admiral McRaven for your life of consequence and for the inspiration you brought tonight. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.